Everyone, I got started a couple of seconds early just because there's quite a number of registrants today. So I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to get here before I get going. It was actually pretty crazy. This was one of the largest registrants I've ever seen for a single webinar. So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes just for everybody to get here. Katie just asked, is this going to be recorded? And absolutely, we record every single webinar. I'll also send out the recording of this webinar to everybody at the end of the day, but we'll be posting this, of course, on our support portal. So I know everybody who's here right now did register, but if theoretically someone hadn't registered, they'd still be able to access this later on. But you'll all be sent a copy, so you can, if I go over anything too quickly, or if you just need to, refresh something later on, you'll still have that copy to reference. Also, if you need to bow out a couple minutes early or something like that, totally fine as well, because this will, like I said, be sent to you. Okay, I know there's still quite a bit more people that were registered, so even though there's still some people coming in, I do want to get started because it's 1:02, so we're just going to get right into it. So hi, everybody. If you don't already know, my name is Sophie, and I'm part of the customer success team based in Toronto. Thanks for taking the time to join us for today's Beyond the Basics webinar. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar is designed for users who are kind of already used to building trips in the trip publisher, who've been on a trial before, at least have some experience with the basics. So for any new users, I usually would suggest joining the Introduction to Umapped webinar first, which is hosted every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can always register for any of our upcoming intro webinars by going to umapped.com and clicking on the webinars button at the top of the screen. You'll see here that little spot right there where you can sign up for the intro to Umapped. Or if you have very specific questions, there's that one-on-one meeting scheduler. Or you can go to our support portal. So that would be support.umapped.com. And you can watch a recorded session right underneath here, this webinars page. Okay, so during today's webinar, we're going to be demonstrating how you can create robust, detailed road trips in the Trip Publisher, including how to add maps and directions, how to add afar and W-City destination content, how to add transportation segments and notes, and then finally, how your travelers can best use the mobile app. So what would exhort your travelers to choose the mobile app over something like the PDF or the web view? So let me just log into my account. Let's just go back to my dashboard. And for this webinar, we're going to be using a trip that I previously created called the Sample Road Trip Pacific Rim Highway. And we'll be adding on to this trip in order to demonstrate how you can construct a road trip within the Trip Publisher. Okay, so let's go in. Now, for the first part of this webinar, we're going to focus on how to add transportation segments to a trip so that we can really focus on having a full, realized itinerary before we add helpful materials like directions, maps, and destination content, which are like not part of the key elements within my itinerary. So as you can see so far in my trip, I only really have accommodations and activity segments. If I know that my travelers are going to be driving between these cities, I'll just want to denote when they're going to be driving and the locations, so that even if my travelers are using their own GPS, they'll be able to input the correct address. So for my trip, which is a 6-day road trip across Vancouver Island from Nanaimo to Victoria, I have a fair amount of transportation segments to enter. The first of which being the ferry from the mainland to Vancouver Island. So this ferry, which passes over the Georgia Strait, will actually carry my travelers and their car to Vancouver Island. So to start, I'm going to click on this little blue plus button, the add icon, and then select transportation. The first thing I'm going to do here is update the transportation type to ferry. So right there, since I want to be as accurate as possible at this point. Now, the only mandatory fields at this point are the company name and the start date and start time, essentially. In the company name field, I can either choose to add the exact company name, such as in this case, I'll put BC Ferries, or you could choose to just write something generic like ferry to Vancouver Island. It just really depends on how specific you want to be. You'll see it's not really pulling from anywhere. Maybe if I had already created a vendor, it would pull from there, but I don't necessarily have to. I could just call this BC Ferries, or I could say ferry to Vancouver Island. Let's just go back to that. From here, I'm going to add my start date and time. So we're going to give this the 2nd at 8 a.m. No, first. Let's see the 1st at 8 a.m. And I'm also going to add an end time, given that I've checked ahead at the ferry's schedule and I know that it ends at 9:40 a.m. So 9:40 a.m. Now I'm just going to leave the end date blank because if I don't put anything there, it's just going to assume it's the same day, so I don't need to worry about that. And I'm also going to add the pickup and the drop-off location so that my clients know exactly where to drive so that they can input the address into their GPS if they're using that. Or if they're just, you want to keep everything very, very clear and crisp so everybody knows where everything is. So we're going to call the pickup location Horseshoe Bay. Oh, if I could spell horseshoe, that would be great. Horseshoe, there we go. And we're going to call the end time Departure Bay. Drop-off location, my bad. Okay, and now that we have all of this, I'm going to add this to my trip. There we go. Okay, so once I've created my transportation segment, I have a couple other categories right here that I can choose to add additional information to. Don't worry, these aren't mandatory fields, of course, so you can choose to leave any of these blank if you'd like, and they just won't appear for your clients at all, not even the header. So these will just stay blank if you don't put anything there. Since this transportation segment is a ferry that I've booked for my clients, I am going to add some pricing information. So I'm just going to click on add pricing. And the total price, because it's $57.50 for the car and $17.20 for each passenger, is $91.90. We'll put the currency as CAD because it's Canadian, and I'm just going to update that. And I'll also maybe add some details where I'll break down this pricing that I put here just so that it makes a little bit more sense. So here I'm going to put $57.50 for the car and $17.20 per passenger. So it's clear. Update. You could also use this as an opportunity to leave any information about BC Ferries as a company or anything else you'd like to do. Okay. Okay, so just to do this again, I'm going to add another transportation segment. But this time, I'm going to add the drive from Nanaimo to Tofino. Again, I'm going to select transportation from that icon, and then I'm going to add the company name, which in this case is just going to be a generic drive to Tofino, since this is my client's personal car rather than a company service. I'm just going to put drive to Tofino. Please also note that if you can't find the appropriate transportation type from the drop-down list, let's say none of these really worked, you can always create your own just by adding to the label field directly to the right of that. This field is going to override the type field. So if, for instance, you've booked a limousine or a private boat, you could always write that into the label right here, and it will erase whatever's in the type. So this gives you, an opportunity to be a lot more specific or a little bit more custom if you wanted to make something that's very much tailored to these clients. And you don't have to choose from the selection provided if nothing really fits what you're going for. So this could also be really helpful if you wanted to, personalize a segment even when the type is applicable. For instance, even though I could theoretically just leave this as transportation because that works perfectly well, I'm actually going to write Sophie's car in the label field just to make sure, that this is uber specific. Okay, and now I'm going to give this a start date of the first. We're going to say start time is 11 a.m. We're going to put the end time as 2 p.m. And we're going to put the pickup location as Nanaimo, BC. And the end is Tofino, BC. Add to trip. So of course, after filling out all of these fields and saving the segment, you'll notice that it's going to say Sophie's car right up here rather than transportation. So just note that this is always an option for you based on how personal or specific you want your trip to be. And I'm just going to move this below the Nanaimo one. I just dragged and dropped it, by the way, to below the Nanaimo activity because this is a drive away from Nanaimo. In case you didn't already know, if you'd like to move segments around that are on the same day, so you can see that these are both on September 1st, you can of course always just drag and drop them into a new order because they're all on the same day, so they'll all count. Okay. So now that I've added maybe all of the pertinent segments and I have all of the actual bookings in my trip, let's just pretend that I had added all of my transportation segments, even though I only just added 2. It's time to go ahead and really spruce up this itinerary by adding relevant destination content. So I'm going to navigate to destination content from the left-hand side, and I'm going to show you one of almost each of the different integrated destination content providers. Just so you can get a sense of how to add from both of these different, AFAR and W cities, maybe as well as our own in a minute too. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add from our 2 destination content providers for Vancouver, BC. So let's just put in Vancouver. I'm going to click the drop down, and this is just going to give my clients some additional reading material. Remember that this is going to appear in the body of the itinerary, so if you're adding a larger destination guide like I might be right now, you may want to add this to the very last day in your trip, just so it doesn't clutter up the main segments. And I'll just add that to my trip. And if you aren't able to find any content for a city that you're sending your travelers to, you can always go to AFAR points of interest. And I'll put in Vancouver as the main search. And then you have an option to use the keyword to look for a very specific city. So I can look up maybe Tofino. I'll look up Tofino. Or like Victoria, actually. There we go. So we got a couple for Victoria, and we'll just take this guy, actually that one, and we'll add it to my trip, and we'll put this on the 4th. Perfect. And then lastly, we're going to do W cities. So I'm going to put in Vancouver again. And you can see the similarities, by the way, between AFAR points of interest and W cities, where to add something to a trip, you have this little checkbox where you just select it, select add to trip, and then choose your date. So here I'm going to put it on the 2nd. And of course, I'm just adding these dates kind of at random right now. If you know the date, that's perfect. If you don't, you can always go back and change these dates later on in your itinerary. There's no reason that this has to be the end all be all for this date. You can always move it to the 3rd, the 4th, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so just to kind of show you an example, by the way, again, of when you can't find a smaller city that they might be going to, I'm just going to go back to AFAR points of interest. And you'll notice that if I try to look up in the AFAR cities, Nanaimo, BC, nothing's going to pop up for me because maybe it's a smaller city, so it might not be part of AFAR points of interest. But if I put in a larger city like Vancouver, and then add Nanaimo as a keyword, and search, I'm able to find some relevant content for my trip. Of course, additionally, you can always create your own content within your library. I think we've all talked about this before if you've ever joined one of our other Beyond the Basics where we've gone over the library. But if you're curious about how to do so, please reach out to our customer success team following this webinar for some more information. We can also provide you with a recorded version of a past webinar on adding documents to your library, since we're not really going to touch on that today. But that's always an option if you have, another external destination content source that you pull from, or if you've written your own in the past and you want to be able to easily save those here, you can always do that. Okay, so since this is a road trip, now that I've added some destination content, you might be wondering how to further tailor this itinerary for your clients by adding, maps and directions so that they can actually drive from one place to another. So regardless of whether or not your clients have their own GPS that they'll be using, adding maps and directions can really go to show your clients that you have everything that they could possibly need, so that even in an emergency, they have this backup set of directions. If your directions aren't an issue because your clients will be using a GPS, but you still want to provide them with an interactive map, you can do so by creating and adding pages from your library. So like I said, while we won't be going into too much detail today about the library, so again, if you aren't too familiar, just get in touch with CS afterwards for a recording of a past webinar. If you have watched previous webinars, you'll know that pages have a variety of interactive features that appear in the web view, one of which being an interactive map powered by Google Maps. So I'll just quickly show you by going to the library, to my documents, and we're going to go to the document that I have called Western Canada, here, this one right here, where I have a number of pages in this document. So for today's example, I'm going to use the Pacific Rim National Park page, so this guy right here, and we're also going to use the Tofino page, so this one right down here. So you'll notice, by the way, if I open up this page, view details, number of interactive content right here. And the one that says location, where I have added a location, is actually what's going to populate that map that I just mentioned. So if you're interested in doing this, just ensure that you're leaving a location in this field here when you're creating your pages, because that's going to generate the map. So now let's go back to my trip. Let's go back to trips dashboard, sample road trip, and we're going to go to destination content to add this page. We're going to go to the last option, add from library, and we're going to now put in Tofino, so search, copy it, and also Pacific Rim. There we go, it's right there. Search, we're going to copy that. Okay, so now if I go back to my trip, we're just going to publish this so that I can quickly create that web view, since if you know, you need to publish a trip in order to create the web view. And then I'm just going to preview it myself so I can show you what this is going to look like. So now if I open up the web view of my trip, when I go to the Tofino, 1 second, just refreshing, there we go. If I go to the Tofino page right here and click on more, that's the map that I added. So you can see the location of the map that I input. And since this is powered by Google Maps, they can interact with this just as they would in Google. Like they can zoom in, zoom out, you can drop down the little guy that walks around, all that kind of cool stuff. And then we'll just leave it and go back to our main page. Okay, however, if your travelers have downloaded the mobile app where this kind of map isn't available, otherwise it would require Wi-Fi or data, and the benefit of the mobile app is that you don't need Wi-Fi or data to access stuff there. You might want to take an extra step and provide them with a static map and potentially directions. So in this case, I'm just going to go back to my trip and I'm going to create a note segment. So this note right here, after clicking on the add icon, which I'm going to title Drive from Tofino. So drive from Tofino to Victoria. And then in the contents of the note, I'm going to simply copy and paste some directions that I found on Google Maps. So you'll notice in another tab I have open the drive from Tofino to Victoria. So all I'm going to do is copy and paste all that stuff right here. You know, you could format it however you'd like. I'm just going to do a very simple copy paste for the sake of time. Actually, I'll do it like this. And you even have the option to link it to a particular segment if you wanted to. So this could be attached to one of your transportation segments, you know, the drive to Tofino, even though this is another one, etc. All right, so I'm just going to add that to my trip really quickly, just to show you. There we go. I didn't put any formatting, highlighting, or anything like that here, but you could do all of that stuff, of course. And additionally, I'm going to take a screenshot of the route and then add the screenshots as photos to the note. So if this drive is particularly long, rather than taking this screenshot right here, which might not be super helpful because it's quite long, I can choose to take multiple photos and then add them to the same note, or I can even create multiple notes where each note provides a section of the directions to make it a little bit more digestible. Someone a little while ago actually told me that he was creating documents in his library that were just pages that contained the various, you know, portions of the drive. So he'd have one page where it was just like this point to this point over here and the directions. And then he added the whole document to his trip so that, you know, rather than being embedded in the main body of the itinerary, it was up in the documents section at the top. So that's always an option as well. There's a lot of people that are doing super creative things. Okay, so if you are going to take screenshots, please note that because each photo is going to resize to fit the photo specifications of the web view, try to ensure that your photos are about 1,000 by 685 pixels. So I'll write that down in a second for all of you, just after I take this screenshot right here, and I'll take one down here. It's approximately that big or so. So we'll just come back here, and at the bottom of this note, I'm just going to write that down for y'all. So about 1,000 by 685 pixels. This is just a rough estimate, but it'll give you an idea of the best size for a photo in the trip publisher so that it doesn't crop incorrectly, and you can actually add things without it getting distorted or, you know, shrunk or enlarged, blah, 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 blah. So I'll just add my photos to this note because of course you can add photos to notes. We'll go to my here. We'll do all of them at once because you can upload multiple photos at the same time. We're just going to upload those. And now we're just going to refresh the web view so we can see what that looks like. Okay, so this is kind of what it's going to look like from the client perspective. You'll see here, this is that note, the drive from Tofino to Victoria. It's got the first photo that I added, some of the directions down here. You can reformat the directions however you'd like. This is super basic, of course, but you could add points, you can bold things, italicize things, add a little chart if you wanted to, all that stuff. And then to peruse the other photos, they just have to click on the little camera icon, not camera icon, the photo icon right there. So they can see some of the other photos as well. Ugh, I definitely put them out of order here, but that's on me. So having these kinds of static photos simply ensures that they'll be able to access their directions no matter where they are or what devices they might already have. So if they're ever going to be without Wi-Fi or data for a specific amount of time and they're not going to use the GPS, this might be helpful. And if their GPS breaks down or something, this is also helpful in that regard. Okay. So if your travelers are going to be on the road trip that involves little to no Wi-Fi or data, we highly recommend that they download the Umapped mobile app, which I will just pull up right here. Okay. Your clients have the option to download the Umapped mobile app from either the App Store or the Google Play Store so that they can view their trips on their smartphones while they're on the go or in destination. One of the great benefits of the mobile app is that these kinds of trip details are available even when your client's phone is offline. So if they don't have Wi-Fi or they're not going to have data for an extended period of time, this is a good way to keep all of their details together so that they're not carrying around a whole other PDF that they might have printed out, and B, they're not going to freak out because they suddenly lost access to the web view on their phone. At least here, everything, once it's been initially downloaded, is there for good. So as you can see from this trip, the mobile app comes equipped with a map as well, right up here, which will pinpoint all of the destinations that your clients are traveling to. So your travelers can always interact with this like the map in the web view. I can't really zoom in with my mobile simulator. It's just a problem with the simulator. But with the regular mobile app, your clients can even zoom in and they can see what streets are nearby if they need to reference anything. So they can interact with this exactly the same way as this map we were looking at up here. Okay, let's pull back up this. And then of course, if I go to that note that I was in earlier, let's go back to that note, the drive from Tofino to Victoria, right there. You can see that the directions are all here. So everything's been contained here, and then you can swipe through those photos that I took earlier as well. So you can see photos of the drive alongside the directions from here to here. Okay, so now let's just go back to my main screen. And let's just go quickly back to the agenda, just so we can see everything we've talked about. Okay, so over the course of this webinar, we've covered how to create detailed road trips in the trip publisher, including how to add maps and directions, how to add a FAR and WCity's destination guide, how to add transportation segments and notes, and then finally how your travelers can best use the mobile app. So the last thing that I quickly want to talk about before we go to the Q&A portion of this webinar, because I think that it ties into everything that we're talking about in the spirit of curating an experience for your clients, is just how you can reorganize stuff within an itinerary. And I think this is a good last place to leave off on, because I do have I have quite a few notes right up here at the top that need to get put in the correct order in my road trip. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes just going over all of the different ways that you can reorganize stuff within your itinerary. And there's a gradation of ways that you can move things around from, super, super easy to a little bit more cumbersome, but, devoid of any user error. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to give a new date to a note segment. So of course, because notes aren't tied down to any particular day or time, you don't necessarily have to have a note on a particular day or time. When you are going to move a note to a new day, you'll notice that when I open up the right-hand drawer, there's this little calendar icon to the right of the note title. If I click on that, I have the option to choose a new date for my note. So let's actually put this one maybe on the 3rd. Let's say the 3rd. Let's move this to the 3rd, add to trip. And then voila, you'll see it's on September 3rd now. We'll close that. So we're going to do maybe the same thing for Tofino to Victoria. We're going to click on that View Details button to expand the right-hand drawer. And the Victoria one is actually on, let's see, where is it? Yeah, it's on the 4th. So we're going to move this to the 4th. Here we go. Add to trip. Et voila. So we're going to close that. And then lastly, we're also just going to talk a little bit about, we mentioned this at the very beginning, but if I have things that are on the same day, such as this transportation segment, the drive to Tofino, and this activity, Cathedral Grove, and I'd actually like Cathedral Grove to come before the drive to Tofino, but of course I didn't add any start time to this activity, so I just put it at the very end of the day. Again, we're just going to drag and drop these. Now this is only going to work on things that are on the same day. You'll notice that if I try to take this city blurb right here and put it above the Waypoint Resort, it's not really going to let me. You'll see it's not letting me in there. And that's because this starts on September 1st and this is tied to September 2nd. So I'm not allowed to like just throw anything wherever I want because then there could be a huge amount of user error. So only segments that are on the same day are going to have that, that ability to drag and drop them into a new order. Of course, the most cumbersome, but probably the safest way to change the dates on segments like, a hotel segment or a transportation segment is just to come to view details, click on the pencil icon, and then change, either the check-in date or the departure date, whatever the segment type is. It's a little cumbersome because you got to come all the way here, but at least you're looking at the date picker and you know for certain that it's not going to be on another day. And then I could just update it. And then the last way that I can reorder segments within my itinerary is actually to come down here to calendar. And you'll see if I go to September, in calendar, I can see at a glance all of the different segments in my trip. Now, if I wanted to, I can actually drag and drop any of these different segments onto a new day. And that's going to be reflected in the main body of my itinerary. So you'll notice I just moved the Afar City Guide from the 6th to the 7th. If I now go to my trip by clicking on the trip button at the top, and I'll just scroll down, and that Afar City Guide is now on the 7th of September. So anything that you do in the calendar is going to get reflected in the main body of the itinerary. Of course, because it's so easy to move things around in the calendar, I could just drag and drop this wherever I want. I do usually caution people to just be a little careful when they're doing this, just to make sure you don't accidentally drag and drop this onto a day that you don't want it on. And maybe always come back and double check in your trip exactly what you just moved, so you know that, okay, it was perfect, successfully moved, it's where I want it to be, I didn't accidentally do anything. But this gives you a really good way where maybe if the trip got pushed by a week and you don't feel like going into each single segment and changing the dates on every single segment, you could just drag and drop all of the bookings down a couple of weeks. So that's what I usually like to tell people is a really easy way to keep the same trip, but just quickly move things around if there's been a delay or something happened and the trip had to get postponed by a couple of weeks. Of course, if it was anything more than a couple of weeks, I would just say create a template and start anew, because you don't want to drag this by a year. But a couple of weeks, this can really help you. Okay. And then the last thing I want to just talk about a little bit is saving this as a template. So if this road trip worked out perfectly well, it had all of the points of content that I wanted to put into it, it has really good transportation segments, really solid hotels, and I know this is something that I'm going to use in the future, you'll want to save this so that you can access it later on. And to do that, I'm going to go to my settings and I'm going to click on the options icon, which is just to the right of the trip name and dates. And from here, you have the option to create a new template and just give it a template name. So I can call this my best Vancouver road trip. And then I'll just create this new template. And now because this is a template, you're going to see that there's a duration rather than set dates. So this could be shown to a variety of different people now. I can even go and maybe change some of these to make them a little less personal. Like I'll just change Sophie's car to personal car, something like that. But otherwise, everything here might be exactly the way I want it. And it has the days rather than specific days. And now if I go to my library, you'll notice that it's right up here in my templates. It's never going to get past dated because it isn't fixed to any specific dates. So I can always come back here, maybe create a new trip from this. If I have someone else that comes to me saying, I love to go on a road trip in Vancouver, and you can say, I have just the thing because you already have it saved. You don't have to go looking through it for past trips. It's ready to go. And you can even, if you'd like, publish it and click on the actions, the little options icon right here to the right of the template name and dates. And you can copy the template link and share this on, a social media post or your website or wherever you want to give this idea of like a model of a trip for future clients to look at. Okay, so now we've got through all of that. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the live Q&A portion of this webinar. Since there are so many people here today, I would like to keep the questions centered around the topic of building road trips. So I'm going to get to those primarily. If there are questions about other things, if we have time for them, I'll definitely get to them. But if not, I'll also probably just message you personally. I just want to make sure that this is super tailored to this specific section. And of course, for anybody that can't stay for the Q&A portion of this webinar, I just want to say thank you for participating. I'll be sending out that follow-up email with a link to a recorded version of this webinar, along with some additional resources and some other cool stuff. And if you have any comments or feedback or anything, you can always reach out to us just by replying to the email that I'm going to send out, or you can send it directly to support@umapped.com. And just thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to take a sip of water and then get to all the questions. So there's quite a few today. Let's go. So the first question, let me just actually get back to my trip because we want to get that. So Tori asked, is the start date and time mandatory in transportation? So let's actually just click on the ad icon and look at the transportation. So the start date is absolutely always going to be mandatory. Especially, since we're making a trip, not a template, and there are specific dates, you absolutely do have to have a start date. But the start time is a little bit more flexible. You'll notice that even though there's that little asterisk that indicates that this is like a mandatory field, if I leave this as 12 a.m. and I leave the end time as 12 a.m. as well, so we'll just put example here for a second. Since these are both set to 12 a.m., when I add this to my trip, even though there's going to be a start date, the times are going to be entirely omitted. So that's kind of a little trick. I'm actually going to go, since this is a good time to bring that up. If you know exactly when the start date is going to be, but you don't really know when they're going to drive or when the drive is going to end, which is entirely reasonable because, who knows, maybe they want to get an early start, maybe they want to sleep in that day. Just leave the start time and the end time is 12. Which it's going to be by default anyway, so just don't touch it essentially. And it will omit from the trip altogether. Another cool hint, by the way, is if you know what the start time is going to be, but you don't really know when the end time is going to be. So let's say they're going to be driving around 10 a.m., but you have no clue when they're going to finish driving because maybe they're going to finish at 4 in the afternoon if it's like they're taking a lot of stops, or maybe they'll finish super quickly if they're just heading straight to their next destination. If you set the start time and the end time to the exact same time, so let's say 10 and 10, and then update that, it's just going to show that start time and then nothing in the end time. So that's a cool little trick as well. So just keep in mind that the two times just have to be the exact same thing, and it's only going to show the one. So let's answer that. Okay, Matthew asked, can you add a photo to the transportation type? For example, a photo of the BC ferry boat. Great question, absolutely. Essentially, anything can be added as a vendor. So by the way, just to get back to this idea of vendors, I think we talked about it at the very, very, very start. When you're adding photos or additional information to BC Ferries is a good example, you do have to create it as a vendor first. So if I added this segment and now I realized I actually would like to add some photos of BC Ferries because I just want this to be a really lush and vibrant trip, I'm going to come, first of all, click on View Details to open up this expansion drawer, and I'm going to click on the little camera icon here. Now it's only going to make you actually enter the name. You don't really ever have to enter any address information or contact stuff if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. So when I save it and add it to my vendors, the next time I click on the camera icon, I can begin adding some photos. So I'm just going to quickly look up BC Ferries so I can pull some photos here. Images. Let's take this guy right here. I'm just going to save it super quick to my desktop. And add a photo. We're going to upload. There we go. Add this photo. And voila, C'est là. So of course I added a super small photo. Don't do that if you're gonna add photos. I just forgot how small this photo was. But you can add as many photos as you'd like here, and they're gonna be visible on both the web view and the mobile app, and the PDF if you're using the PDF. So you can always add photos to every single segment. I think that the only segment where it wouldn't probably show up in the client side is for flights. I think this is the only one where photos are not going to show up. For every other segment, like accommodations, activities, cruises, notes, transportation segments, all of those photos are going to show up on your client side. I think it's only flights that don't appear. Oh, Dana asked, can you show again how they can do the Google walk around? Oh, that's super, super easy. So I'm just going to open up the trip web view again, and then we'll go to, wait, no, this isn't the trip, that's the template. Let's get my trip all fired up here. So because all of the maps that we're pulling are coming from Google Places, like the map over here, for instance, you know, that overall trip map, as well as the more specific locations that I added to some of my pages, like this Pacific Rim Park page where I added the location of Pacific Rim National Park. It's just a Google map, so they can just add the little guy over here and then walk around just like you would in Google. It's exactly the same. We're pulling, all of the maps we pull from are coming from Google. So no matter what map you're in, you're gonna have these capabilities. Okay, let's say that's good. Hazel asked, is this recorded? Yes, for sure. I know you missed the first part. That's totally fine. I'm gonna send this to you guys in an email later on, so you can always review that portion. Okay. Deborah asked, will the mobile app open on the actual day of their trip so that they don't have to start back at the beginning? Great question. Actually, yes, it does. So let me just share my full screen. Maybe I can actually show an example of that with a trip that already started. So I'm just going to go back to my main page. Do I have anything that's already started? Those are all for February. Let me just, I mean, I will say right now, if let's say this trip had already started, let's say it was February 7th or something, rather than starting right up here at the top, if it was February 7th, this would, actually it starts on the 12th. If this was February 17th, it would automatically scroll down to the closest thing to February 17th. So if there was a booking on the 17th, it would scroll directly to here. But I do want to show you that. So what I think I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to add myself as a traveler on a current trip. Let's make this guy actually start right now. So we're going to make this guy start January 1st. And we're just going to add a note, Jan 1, then we're going to add one on Jan today. Note, Jan 19, nope, it's the 20th. I should know that. Jan 20. Okay, so we're just going to republish, force the refresh. Oh, I hadn't added myself as a traveler. Sometimes it's like I don't even work here. Okay, there we go. Give me a second. There we go. So there's my sample trip to Disney. And it's not going to scroll, is it? Okay, because I put them all at the top. Let's put an actual accommodation. There, you'll see it automatically scrolled me to January 20th. So I don't have to bother with the scrolling myself as the client. It'll just bring me there automatically. Sorry that took a couple of seconds. I just wanted to really show that how that worked. Okay, let's go back to my main page. Okay. Tiffany asked, when adding a map, you just clicked copy. Do you have paste somewhere or does it automatically know where to go after you copy? So this is actually something, okay, uh, what Tiffany means by that, by the way, is if I go to destination content within my trip and I go to add from library, so let's just put in Tofino again, because that was what I used last time. You'll see it says copy rather than, choose a date or anything like that. When I click on copy, that just means that this page is automatically going to go to the top of my trip. That's just the way that this was designed in the past, but something I've actually been wanting to hear more from travel advisors recently is if you're adding from the library like this, would it be more beneficial for us to have a date picker here, the same way we have with W Cities, where when you're adding something, there's that date picker? Or is the copy button something that most people tend to use? So that's actually a question I'm going to pose to everybody. So if you have thoughts on that, let me know, because the more I know, the more I can push product team to change from copy to a date picker. So that's actually a question I want to pose to everyone else. So just let me know if you have thoughts on that. But at the moment, it's going to automatically go to the top of your trip. You'll see we did this before. So I'll go to trip. It's going to be right up here at the top, and then you would have to click view details and click on the calendar icon to choose a new date. So might be a little cumbersome. So good to know if anyone has thoughts on that. Okay. Let's see what other questions are there. Tori also asked, when you set up an itinerary with dates, is it automatically reflected in the calendar? When you set up an itinerary with dates, is it automatically reflected in the calendar? Yes. So essentially anything everything that's in your trip that has dates like this is going to be reflected in the calendar. These two are essentially tied together. If that clears everything up, you'll notice, by the way, that anything that doesn't have a date on it, like any of these notes, Pacific Rim Park or Tofino, these don't have dates right now. They're kind of like pre-trip things because they don't appear within a specific day. If I go to the trip web view, you'll notice they don't have a date at the very top here. The first date's only going to appear here. So for those segments that don't have a date affixed to them, those are not going to appear in the calendar because, of course, they don't have a date affixed to them. But for everything else that does have a date, it is going to appear in here. And because calendar and the main trip are completely linked, like there's nothing you could do here that wouldn't get reflected in the main body of the itinerary, absolutely nothing. Anything I do here is going to affect my trip. So you can't use this as a place to like experiment or anything like that. This is very much like if you move it here to that, it's going to get moved here to that. The only thing, like I said, that's not going to appear in the calendar are those like notes that I added to the top that don't have a date affixed to them yet, just because it's dependent upon dates. Dana asked, is location always available, or will we sometimes have to add it so that we have the map capability? So that's a good question. This kind of harkens back to some things that we talked about during my webinars on documents and pages. But I'll just go over it very quickly because I think that this is beneficial for right now. So I'm going to go to my Western Canada document, and you'll notice maybe I could pick one that doesn't have a location. That one does. I tend to add them for everything, so I just want to find something that doesn't have one. Oh man, I really do add it for everything. Okay, here, perfect. Lake Louise doesn't have a location. So in all of my pages in a document, all of the interactive elements, when this page is initially created, are going to be blank. So that means there's no description, there's no links, there's no videos, et cetera, et cetera. And that also includes that there's no location because this page could be anything. Pages don't necessarily have to be destination content. They can be agency documents, they can be um, your contact info if you wanted to have like a page that was just like every single way they can get in contact with you, emergency numbers, things like that. So because of the fact that pages don't have a specific intent and you can really do anything with them, locations aren't just going to populate automatically. You have to add those yourself. So when you're creating the page and you added all those main details like the page name, the main body of the page, you're going to have to come to location and then add a location here. Now, when you're adding the location, it's super easy because we're pulling from Google Places. So all I really have to do is type Lake Louise, and you'll see I already have tons of suggestions. And they're all coming from Google Places. So you know that all of the location is accurate, and you know that if I click on Lake Louise, Alberta, Canada, all this info fills out for me. So I don't need to add anything here. So that's a really cool thing. When you're adding a location, you don't actually have to do a tremendous amount of work because it's pulling from a database that's already prepared and set, but you do have to add it yourself. So there, now I've got the location. So if I added Lake Louise to a trip or a template later on, that map is going to appear for Lake Louise. But if I hadn't put anything here, or if I deleted it or something, then it wouldn't appear. So it's a manual process, but it's quite easy once you do it. Okay, so let's see, anything else? I know we're nearing towards the 2 p.m. mark, so I don't want anybody to feel like pressured to stay if they have to leave, but I am gonna keep talking up until 2, and then I'll call it quits. Okay, so there's quite a few things in the chat, so let's see if anything else. That's that, yeah. Okay. Let's see, there's quite a few more. Okay, and Dana also asked, can I convert a past trip to a template? Great question. Yes, you can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my trips dashboard. So to actually find those past trips, first of all, we're going to click on the filters right here, and we're going to filter by past trips. So all of your past trips are still there. They just aren't the first thing you see, because I know a lot of you probably have like upwards of 100 to 200 trips saved in your past trips. So we don't want you to be like cluttered with all of your past trips instead of the stuff that you want to focus on by default. But if you want to go find a past one, you can filter by past. If you do have quite a lot of past ones like I do here, you can refine the search even more by maybe adding a keyword. So I can look up like Barcelona, for instance, and that's going to give me whatever trips I had tagged with Barcelona or with Barcelona in the name. And then from here, all I got to do is click on the options icon, and I can create a brand new template. Or if I already have a Barcelona template that I was working on, I could even add this to that. So it depends what you're doing, but both options are available to you. So it's super easy. All you got to do, first of all, like I said, is find the past trips, refine it down a little bit more. If you have a lot of trips like London, like look how many I have for London. That's not that bad. What about Europe? It's actually not that bad. So if you do have a lot of trips, actually, you know what? I'll look up the word sample. That will give you, if you have a lot of trips like this, where there's like, one keyword, if you have like a lot of past trips, I would refine it using a keyword. Let's say London. Again, this was pretty good. And then from here, click on the options icon, create new template. And because none of these templates have dates affixed to them, they're all just going to appear right here under my templates. Okay. But if you have more questions about templates, by the way, reach out to us at CS, because we do have a lot of past webinars that give you way more info on templates than I could do today. Ayush asked, can we add a website link in the transportation segment? Okay, good question, actually. So actually, first of all, let's go back to my trips. Specific trip. So I have a couple of thoughts around this. First of all, like we were talking about earlier, because you can add a transportation to your vendors, you do have the option when you're creating your vendor to add any kind of website information or contact information to the vendor profile. Earlier, I didn't put anything because I didn't care about anything except the name, but you do have that option to like put the website right here or put the phone number right here or something like that. So that's always an option. I'll just do like bcferries.com, even though that's definitely not the email, and that's going to appear. The other thing you could do is, if you have, like, maybe you wanted to give like a, if this was about transportation segments, you could always create a note that had maybe some more details about the transportation. You know, maybe this was the directions, or more about the company, or more about the schedule or something. You know, for BC Ferries, maybe I want to actually outline the whole schedule here, just in case they miss the one at 8 a.m. They know exactly when the next one's going to be there. And because, so I can call this like BC Ferries schedule. There's schedule here. I'm not going to actually put one. Because of the fact that pages also have quite a number of interactive elements, I could add a link to the schedule website or BC Ferries website or something like that. So there's a couple different ways that you can add links. It really depends how you want it to display. Okay, so we have some more questions. I think I have time for like a couple more questions, so let's just get into. Kim asked, sticking with your BC Ferries segment, can you also enter the location so that they can use that to drive there? So that's exactly. So with things within your actual itinerary, so actually the first thing I should probably clarify is that location thing that you saw when we were creating a page in my document. So let's just go to this one right here. This location section right here, this is actually only going to be available in the library. So 4 pages. So you'll never see this location thing on any other segment, first of all. But what I would say is, if you wanted to, you know, maybe instead of creating individual notes within a trip that each have like a picture of the directions and like the directions written out. Like I was talking about earlier, there have been people who've come to me and told me that they made a document that was just entirely the road trip, because if I made a document called Vancouver Road Trip, I'm not going to be able to put anything there. And then I have a page called Tofino to Vancouver, and I put the directions here. So this would be like directions. You can then add the location to this page. So if you do want that little map to populate for something like directions, like the drive to go to BC Ferries so that they know exactly where they need to go, I would really recommend making a document, because that's how you're going to be able to access this location. Like I said, you're not going to see this on any other segment type in a trip. It's really exclusively for the library. Okay, anything else? Anne asked, hello, after you publish the itinerary and want to update it, is this possible? Yep, absolutely. So if I just go back to my trips, and I can go into any trip at this point. When you publish a trip, it doesn't stop you from continuing to make edits or anything like that. You still have full access to do all of that cool stuff. So I can still make edits to any of my stuff here, like that. I can still make edits to the actual main dates and main information in the trip by clicking on this pencil icon right here. And if I ever made any extensive changes and I wanted to make sure that those changes were reflected on my client side, you can just push the update by clicking on republish. And you have the option to, send a brand new email or not. By default, you're not going to send one, but if you wanted to send an email, you could. This is, I've had people tell me that they use this, like if there's 1 or 2 days up before the trip is about to get started and they just want to remind them that the trip is on its way. They just might say like last call, something like that. So that might be a good reason to republish. But it also forces any updates that you've made onto your client side. So if they're using the app, they're going to be prompted to refresh. If they're using the web view, it's going to automatically refresh. Or you can send them a brand new copy of the PDF or whatever they're doing. So republishing is just going to force them to accept the updated version of your trip. or if they wanted to receive a new copy of the email, maybe the last one you sent was like a month ago because you just wanted them to proofread it and now they're actually about to set off. You might want to send a new version, but you can always continue to make edits. Nothing's ever going to get locked in the trip. Okay, so we're at 2 p.m., so I am going to end the webinar now. I know that there's still quite a number of questions, but don't worry, I'm going to save all of your questions and then reach out to each of you individually after this. But I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for all of your questions and for your participation. We stretched out what ended about half an hour ago into a full hour webinar, so thanks again so much. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at support@umapped.com. And if you have feedback or recommendations or anything like that, just let us know. The more people we know who want a specific thing, like today's thing was like the date picker for pages, the more that we can make the case to product to prioritize that. So if you have feedback, always let us know. It never hurts, even if we say we can't do it right now. So thank you guys so much again for everything, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon.